Thank you to the National Association for Primary Education for their long-term support of the Education on Fire podcast. To get a free e-copy of their professional journal, Primary First, please go to nape.org.uk/journal. That's nape.org.uk/journal. Hello, my name is Mark Taylor, and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place for creative and inspiring learning from around the world. Listen to teachers, parents and mentors share how they are supporting children to live their best authentic life and are proving to be a guiding light to us all. Hello and welcome back to the Education on Fire podcast. Today I'm going to be joined by Dr. Steven Greene, who is a lifelong educator, best-selling author of the book Maximum Education. He's the host of the Make the Grade podcast and an online success community facilitator. His mission and focus are simple: to provide actions to his students to maximise their education. Back in 1997, he founded Make the Grade Academic Services, which has provided educational consulting and tutoring services to over 13,000 students and their families, and still counting. Now, we are still fundraising to bring lots of the wisdom and the information that we're sharing on the Education on Fire podcast to create a child-friendly book that we can gift to the children in our lives. To find out more about how you can support this in terms of a donation or to share it with your network, please go to educationonfire.com/book. That's educationonfire.com/book. And to support you to find out how you can make the grade, this is my wonderful conversation with Dr. Steven Greene. Hello, Dr. Steven Greene. Thank you so much for joining us on the Education on Fire podcast. Tell us a little bit about Make the Grade and exactly the sorts of educational inspiration that you're involved in.
Well, good morning, Mark. Make the Grade was founded in 1996, and the original mission was to help students who were done with secondary school but not quite ready for college. It was sort of a transitional program, and over time it's morphed into helping students and families to give them the skills, to give them actions academically, in terms of college and university admissions, and in terms of kind of their overall approach to their academics in school on a daily basis. So specialize, I suppose, in subjects like math and science, but also tests like the SAT and ACT. And then I have authored a book which focuses on, I guess simply put, how to be a good student and manage your time, manage your information, do this every day successfully. And I bundle all that together, and that's what we provide students and families with. So that is our goal.
I think the thing that struck me when I was looking at all of the resources you had on your website and everything which you're involved in was the intentionality about it, which I really like. There's certainly a feeling sometimes that children start to drift. You know, you go to school because you have to, and then you sort of meander a little bit, and then, like you say, as you get towards that kind of college age, you suddenly realise that if you want to take that next step, then you have to put some things in place and start learning. And I sort of like the process of those sorts of skills going a little bit earlier than that. So tell us a little bit about why you came to that sort of intentionality and those tools specifically. Was it just something which you knew worked based on your experience of tutoring?
Well, before I was in private tutoring, I was a teacher. I was a high school and a university teacher, professor. And once I started tutoring privately, one thing I found very quickly was most of the time when students struggled, it wasn't an intellectual issue. It wasn't that they couldn't do it. They either were too unorganized or unmotivated or just not paying attention, frankly. And I think some of this was because they maybe didn't care. They weren't invested in the process. But often I would see kids come over to my school or to my office, and the notebooks would have paper sticking out in every different direction. They couldn't find their homework, or they would do their homework and not hand it in. So there's a level of academics that isn't simply learning the material. Some of it is protocol. You have to go to the class, you have to hand your work in, you have to be prepared for your exams. And I always wanted to blend that and prioritize that in addition to, or as complementing, the actual teaching of the academics or preparing them for a specific exam or not. And over time, I started to collect a lot of materials that I used to do that: calendars, flowchart, sort of just efficiency tools, if we can use that term. And that's eventually what I put together that made the book. And then once I had the book, it was a lot easier to teach it because now I had a workbook and a kind of a tool to do it with. But I think what it comes down to is there's a lot of reasons why a student could be successful in school, but some of them are technical, some are academic, but some are also motivation. And it's demotivating or unmotivating for a kid when they don't have the right tools. Because I've seen a lot of kids, and I imagine parents out there as well have seen, I work. I studied X number of hours for this quiz, and I still got a C. Well, because sometimes there's an inefficiency of time, right? Just because you spend 6 hours prepping for something doesn't mean you're doing it well. So one of my missions became and remains giving students as much access as I can to this type, the tools they need to have this efficiency and to be able to basically work up to the potential, as I like to say, my kind of phrase is maximize their education, and go from there. So it's a matter of awareness, and it's also a matter of functionality and having the tools that you need, the students need.
Yeah, I love the clarity of that. And I think the awareness was where I was just thinking as you were talking there. It's the fact that once you realize that there is more to it than just being in class, or like you say, just sort of going through the motions, there is actually an
Mm-hmm.
awareness of how you can structure things, how you can show up when you're studying, how you show up in school, how you want to progress, the fact that you even want to progress and that you have some control over that, then that, like you say, that opens up a whole new world, and it also opens that engagement, I think, which is obviously the most important thing.
There's no question about that. And something I see often, and we may have somewhat of an international audience here, so my vernacular may be off a little bit, but I see students who are basically bright, smart kids. So they can reach a point in school where they just don't struggle. Now, in the United States, at least, a big break point is between eighth and ninth grade, which is about a 14-year-old kid, where they go from what we call middle school, or some people call junior high school, to high school. And another huge transition clearly would be going from high school to a university or college level. But as the workload increases and the demands and the complexity of the classes increases, a lot of kids reach a point where they can't get by just on their wits anymore. It's not enough just to go home, read it over once, or go through the notes once, and then show up the next day and do well on an exam. And the challenge is they don't have anything to fall back on because they've disregarded worrying about having a system because they always could get by just on their sheer ability. And as I said, I see this commonly at a couple different points with kids. And this is kind of I don't know, it's not like a revelation is probably too strong a word, but it's a point where people will say, well, what am I going to do? And they don't really know where to go for help because this is not something typically that's taught in schools. Schools teach outlining and things like this, but they don't really teach a kind of a comprehensive how to be a successful student as an idea. And I'm not sure it's the role of the schools, and I'm sure different systems would think differently about that. But that's where I see the stuff I'm doing as providing that skill set and plugging that gap. And I think it's needed. On a local, national, international scale, I just see it eventually with thousands of kids. So I feel like what we're doing here is providing functional, hands-on, practical knowledge that people can actually just use right away. Because just conceptual stuff doesn't really get by with these things.
And I can hear parents and teachers alike saying, I mean, I personally think that's absolutely true, but how do you get that across to the child who is still able to get by on their natural ability, who doesn't need that? How do you get that at a point early enough that they can comprehend it and make most of it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it individually it's going to be different. I've always felt it's about showing value because you're dealing with an age. 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old, where if they don't think it's important, they're not going to bother, right? I mean, you're a parent. I'm not sure how old your kids are, but believe me, once you get teenagers, if they don't think it's going to help them, or they're not interested in it, they shut down very quickly. And there's a degree of, okay, let me show you how you can do this, and let me demonstrate why it will help you. And there's a trust factor as well. Students, people, everybody are going to listen more when they feel you're honest and you're there honestly to help them. And you're not just trying to be dogmatically demanding something to do this because I said so. That's not the relationship, and that's not the energy that we're trying to project out there. We're saying, listen, there's a lot of ways you could do this. And there's certainly a lot of ways that we could define success, but I can show you a path of low or maybe least resistance. You can get there as easily as we can show you to get there. And then one last thing I'll say about this is everything I'm teaching has multiple ways it can be done. So everything, there's 4 or 5 steps in the process, and each of those 4 or 5 steps has multiple possible manifestations of how they happen. So student A could have kind of part 1 from part 1, part 6 from part 2, and part 2 from part 3. I don't define them that way, but I think you get the point. So in the end, it becomes an individual choice, and it becomes something that each student or each family can tweak and develop as what works for them. And I think that's why it becomes successful. And the other thing I'll add is it's important to get students to think big picture. Everyone is so focused on grades, and everybody is so focused on these sort of micro assessments. And sometimes they don't look at the larger idea. Where are you really trying to get in 2, 3, 4 years? And I think that's important as well, is helping students to set goals, think beyond the quiz that's this Friday or the test that's next week, and look how everything fits into a larger agenda of goal setting and really ultimately what you want to do with your life. I think those things in combination, when presented properly, and there's a little bit of, I mean, not even a little bit, there's an element of psychology here as well. And fortunately, I have a little bit of a background in it, but I think that's kind of the idea. It's sort of a combination of motivation, practical knowledge, showing them the big picture, and then showing that you're there to help them. We're on the same team. When I'm working with a student or a family, we're on the same team. We have the same goal set. And that's how it brings it all together, I believe.
Yeah, I really like that, and I think that being in it together is the most important feeling, isn't it? And I think it's that relationship in and any student feeling like you're working with them, which then opens the door to all those things that you've spoken about. And certainly for me, one of the key things which I think has been really successful, especially when they don't have a big picture, because they don't know what they want or where they want to go, is sometimes it's just a question of working out what you don't like. I like this area but not that area. I like working in this scenario but not that scenario. I like big groups. I like working on my own, whatever that happens to be. And sometimes you can just put a few things into the weeds by knowing what you don't like and then allowing that big picture to emerge.
Absolutely. I don't think it's particularly realistic to expect a 14 or 15-year-old person to have an extremely clear vision of what they want to do for the next 50 years of their life. I think sometimes it can happen, but I think generally there's enough out there. And I think that's part of the reason people go to college, right? Is to try different things or to have exposure and see, kind of stick their toe in the water, so to speak. But the point I think that's very important here is the team element. And, in a sense, we all win together or we struggle together and we work towards it. Listen, in a way, the best thing that can happen for me is when a student does well, because you know how parents are. They want to tell everybody, how's your kid? Oh, I just got a 15, 20 on the SAT, which for the audience doesn't know is an extremely, extremely good score. They'll tell every single person that'll listen. Oh, how do you do that? Oh, I work with this guy, so and so, and they give my phone number or whatever, my email, and then everything just progresses from success. And that's really how I want it to be. So I don't mean in a business sense. I mean in the sense of just everybody's having the satisfaction with what we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And let's just talk a little bit now about the fact that that exposure and that success can be shared globally. You know, the technology idea, the fact you can do online courses, the sharing the information on the podcast, all of that. So I'm assuming that the essence of what we've been talking about is still the same. It's just the delivery mechanism and the fact that we can actually support children in a much more sort of light touch way to begin with, and then sort of allow them to get involved as much as they need to.
Well, think about this, Mark. In the United States, at least, our educational system is rooted in the English educational system because of the, one point, America was a colony of England. The English system is, in some way, shape, or form, rooted in Europe or Rome, because of that lineage. And the Roman system was rooted in Greece, and who knows when before that. So we're talking fundamentally about an educational, the Socratic method system. It's going back 4,000 or 5,000 years. I'm not positive what the number is, but what you said is exactly true. The way it's being conveyed and communicated has changed radically, even in the last 5-10 years. When I got into started tutoring and my company, there was no online chat. There was no online audio. There was no online video. There wasn't even text messaging, if anybody can believe that, who's under 20. There wasn't even the internet. What were we talking about? And I kind of grew up in my business as this stuff evolved. There's no social media, nothing. So basically, I was teaching people kind of the same way that Abraham Lincoln or, I don't know, Isaac Newton were learning, which was face-to-face. In sort of a demonstrated way. Hey, watch me do this. Now you try it. Let's do a more complicated one. Now you try it. And that really hasn't changed. But what's clearly way, way different is the way that we're doing it. I mean, if you had told me even 10 years ago, I could support people in Japan or Germany or India or even in other states in the United States, California, I'm on the East Coast of the United States, New York, it would have sounded ridiculous, right? But the technology has paced at such a degree that not only is it strong enough to support this and the availability of computers and Chromebooks and probably most importantly, the internet to everyone. Well, I don't say everyone, but as many people as can get to it now. And that's really what's made a huge, huge difference. The other thing that's really been very, very helpful is the ability to work with many people at once. In other words, I can, and you can do that two ways. I can hold a class online and have 50 kids in it from anywhere. I've done that where I have kids in 50 different places all logging in to the same thing. And that's not like I'm the only one who can do that. It's not proprietary, but just the fact that that can happen. And the second thing is the huge explosion of asynchronous education where anyone could make a course, a video course, an audio course, whatever, have it hosted on a site somewhere and people could log in or access it and view it. So I have courses like that, but just those two things alone have made the availability of the information so much easier, so much faster. And I think because of that, the quality of it has gone up as well. And this and this. So yeah, I don't listen. I don't know what the end point is. I don't know what we're going to be doing in 10 years. Or we just, everybody just think and everybody else knows it. I mean, I think there's a point where it'll sort of plateau. But it all gets smaller. We went from big, giant, bulky computers to small computers to phones to watches. And I think the next thing is sort of the virtual reality. And I was involved with a person who's trying to do now 3D virtual reality instruction, where people would wear the virtual reality glasses and such, and then you would actually be teaching, and it would be almost like they're sitting in a live lecture hall. So I'm thinking that's probably the next progression with this. But let me add one last thing, because just to date this is early October 2020, and where we are, at least, we're still in the whole COVID shut-in world. So even if people were, I don't know what word I want to use, anti is probably too strong, but even if people didn't believe that virtual education, distance learning, call it what you may, could be very, very functional and very, very successful, a lot more people are buying into it now. So I think there was a bit of a skepticism of, oh, my kid can't learn online, or my kid doesn't want to learn online, or it's hard to teach somebody online. And because so many more people are now being compelled to do it, the whole trust factor and the people's belief that they can learn that way has expanded tremendously. And I think that's going to lead to an even larger explosion of virtual education over the next, I don't know, whatever, year, 2 years, 5 years.
I think that's really true, and I also hope, in lots of ways, that the sort of the virtual reality idea actually helps some of the more artistic subjects, or the artistic creative things that we learn within schools, which is harder to learn on a Zoom call. But I think that this kind of concept of that sort of 3D idea and all of that will actually bring that to life in a much more user friendly, like I say, when the technology's there and when the access is there. And there are a couple of other things which I thought you said which were really, really interesting. And I think the fact that you can learn from anybody around the world now is absolutely fantastic, because what it does is it means that you can study with the best, you can learn with the best, you're not restricted to the person who happens to be down your street or happens to be the person teaching at your school. But I guess the flip side of that is you have to be really careful about who they are, and so that credibility, that experience is going to be a really important factor about you then deciding who it is that you do want to go and find.
Yeah, that's both very, very accurate points. Is the availability is there, and it's much, much greater, and then but the uh, credibility can sometimes come into question because it's such a low entry barrier, right? Anybody can set up a website or whatever in a portal and say they're an expert in something, and how's anybody going to know? So it's a caveat emptor sort of thing. But the beauty of it is, in an idealistic way, I can say, listen, I want to learn how to play the percussion, right? Well, who's the best percussion teacher in the whole world? Oh, what? Look, there's this guy, Mark Taylor, in the north part of London, and I could have access to you. Whereas under normal circumstances, probably not. Maybe not even probably not, almost definitely not, because as you say, we're limited geographically and we're limited financially. Um, it's interesting because, and it almost pains me to say this because I think they get a negative connotation, but what drives a lot of this stuff is the online gaming world. And I see a lot of kids, one of the biggest complaints I get from parents, my kids spend so much time on these darn video games, and I can't get them off the video games, and they're always on the computer or always on their phone, chatting with their friends. But a lot of that drives the technology because the games demand greater and greater core processing and video processing and audio processing. And because the companies, the big company, the Microsofts, the Sonys of the world, are driven to provide that, the education and all the other ancillary things can piggyback on that. So, that's kind of how it works. I'll tell you one thing. I think the best part about this is the availability, because there are still, unfortunately, a lot of people in the world that do not have access to great education. In the United States, you hear the word underserved a lot, but typically they're in urban environments or in countries that are just not as, unfortunately, financially sound. So there are people getting left behind. We're potentially, for sure, getting left behind. And that's everywhere. I do some pro bono work locally in some schools that just they don't have computers. Their dropout rate is high. So we're not a lot of things we're talking about are very, very accessible to, I don't know, upper middle class. I don't know how to categorize it sort of socioeconomically, but not to every single person, right? And I'm hoping that that's something that can expand, because education is the ticket for better life for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I loved the sort of where we started in terms of that sort of variety of the things that you can offer. One child might come across the book that you've written because it's on a desk somewhere or in a library, or someone passes it on, or it might be that they have some technology which is old and not really working, but they can still listen to a podcast, or it might not be that they can get onto a virtual webinar and do that because of the broadband width or whatever it happens to be. But at some point, hopefully, with enough of these conversations and enough people making a big difference in the world, just like yourself, what that's going to do is it's going to give more access to more people in whichever way that happens to be. And I think it's these conversations, it's these ideas, it's people putting this effort in, I think is the driver.
There's no question about it. I have no idea who said it, but years ago I was on a conference and somebody said, not education, information is one of the few things that exists that can be replicated infinitely. It's a resource that never diminishes. Food, you can only feed so many people, and water, only so many people can drink. But information, 100 million billion people can get the exact same information without any degrading of the quality of it. And it's just a matter of getting that chain going and getting people to understand it and move forward with it. Some of the things we're talking about, Mark, are a little bit idealistic, but you know what? I think you have to think that way because what we want as educators and as parents are just people to have the opportunity and to have access. What the kids and the children and students do with it, to a degree, is up to them. I see us as educators and parents, as providers, as motivators, as structural sort of coordinators. But in the end, the kids have to understand what their why is, and they have to understand why they want to do it and what they want to accomplish. And we're giving them the tools. We're trying to give them the mindset. We're trying to give them the upbringing. But ultimately, they have to make that decision. They have to run with it. So I always try to keep that as part of the equation as well.
Yeah, I think all these things are multifaceted, aren't they? And I think you're absolutely right. The big picture thing is important, but then, like you say, it's having the mechanisms and the tools and the understanding and the support around you to make that a reality. And I think understanding even that as a concept is really important for children. And it's certainly one of the reasons why one of my big drivers at the moment is to compile a lot of these interviews and put it into a book for children, because I just want them to understand that while they might be great at maths or physics or music or whatever it happens to be, a lot of it's the advice, it's the resources, it's these conversations which actually get all of that started, and I think it's going to be really important that. And let's just talk a little bit about sort of your school experience or a teacher that you remember. Was that a real driver for you in terms of being involved in education?
Both of my parents were educators. So I grew up in a home where it was the norm. We'd eat dinner. My mother would grade papers. My father was a college professor. My mom was a first grade teacher. So they were kind of on opposite ends of the educational continuum, but their roles were basically the same. So they'd be making lesson plans and grading papers and cutting out letters out of construction paper to hang up on the bulletin boards. And so it was very natural for me to feel like education was just sort of my destiny. My sister, turns out, is a college professor. My brother's a lawyer and a law professor. So I guess we all kind of got that. Along the way, there's certainly been teachers, professors that have really motivated and impacted me. And I could single a few up, but I'll mention one specific, a guy named Tony Evangelista. And he was a teacher I had when I was doing a training to become a teacher specifically in inner city situations. And he ran a program taking teachers and kind of giving us an insight into some of the special, I don't know, some of the particular challenges we might have in these environments, like kids not having books or kids being 3 grade levels behind. And one of the things he said, which I never forgot, was, paraphrasing it, if you care enough about the kids and you can communicate that you care, they'll listen to you. And if you treat it like a job where you're just going to get a paycheck every Friday or whatever, they won't. And I that just really resonated with me. And because it's true. Teaching, education, mentoring, whatever you want to label it as, is a labor of love to a degree. And when the people on the other end feel like you care about them, they'll bend over backwards for you to try to please you, right? It's like coaching, same thing. And he didn't push the idea. He kind of said it, and he would say it every couple of lessons that we had. But it was so absolutely true, that I just it became part of my whole modus operandi of teaching. Because when I went to become a teacher, I went to high school, I went to college, I majored in education and math because you have to major in something else to teach. I went to graduate school to become actually a principal or headmaster, you might refer to it as, in schools. And I turned out I didn't like the administrative side. I wanted to stay in the teaching side, but it was all very technical. You'd learn, here's how you make a lesson plan. Here's how you do this type of style. And that's fine because you do need to know that too. And they'd have classes on psychology and Maslow's hierarchy and things of this nature. But I don't know that there was a human sort of piece to it. And I think that's what Dr. Evangelista conveyed. And this was years ago. I mean, this was before I even started my tutoring business. I was still in the teaching side. So he's one I always single out. But we all, I think every person has some person like this, and it may not be a school teacher. It may be a coach or just some adult who was a role model for them in a positive way in their life. And I think that that's valuable. Well, not valuable. I think it's critically valuable.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing I was talking about in terms of being able to share this sort of wisdom, and sometimes, well, I think you do inherently know it when you hear it, and it's, that particular advice is incredibly important, but as well.
I'll tell you a story real quick. In the last year around Thanksgiving, I had to go to the supermarket. My wife was cooking something, and we were cooking something. I like to cook too, but anyway, we didn't have some ingredient we needed, so I had to go down to the market to buy it. I'm standing in line, and there was a person behind me that looked really familiar, but I couldn't place him. And we're kind of looking at each other, and we didn't say anything. And he says to me, "You Dr. Greene?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You know what? You tutored me when I was in ninth grade and 11th grade. I tutored him in ninth grade biology. At 11th grade, I taught him the SATs to get into college." Now, this person is now 32, which kind of dates me, a little older, but he went to college, went to medical school, went to residency. Now he's a surgeon working at a hospital in Boston and was home for the weekend for Thanksgiving to visit his parents. And he made a comment like, it wasn't like he was effusively praising me, but he said, you really helped me. And some of the things that you taught me, I used later. It wasn't just like you only taught me biology. I used it in college and medical school and technique wise, not necessarily information wise. And, I remember walking out of the supermarket and it felt good. It's like, this is why we do what we do. We're trying to make a living. I got to pay rent. I got to put food on the table, but you can't buy that, that you would impact somebody. I haven't seen this kid in 15 years. I didn't work with him in 15 years. And it was just a random thing, just happened that moment. But it was really, really cool. And, I think a lot of us in education, that's part of why we do it, maybe all of why we do it. And not just in education, but in any of these roles where you help people. And, it's good. It's just a really good thing that stuff like that can happen as not only a success story for that boy I was mentioning, but just, for the whole process.
I think we often don't hear those things as often as they actually do affect people, because like you say, probably for every one of that person there's another handful that feel exactly the same but just didn't have that random encounter to be able to tell you. And I think keeping that in your heart is really key in terms of keeping that motivation going, isn't it?
There's no question. Listen, we're all going to have a legacy somewhere, right? And I'm hoping mine would include at least that I did what I could to help as many people as I could. I'm not saying that because I want people to pat me on the back. I'm saying it because it's what I really do, and it's what I really believe in. And the fact that it's measurable and tangible to a degree is a bonus, And that's kind of the thing. The Yeah, but you're absolutely right. You don't know everybody that you've touched. And I'm not saying I've been perfect and every single person I work with is an incredible success story. I don't think that's realistic. Um, but it's a goal, and it's a mission statement, and it's a mindset, and that's really what's important. And that's part of what culturally within my business and my service, I always try to do. So
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And just as we start to round up, we talked about sort of the legacy and the sort of the content that we're putting out into the world that hopefully is affecting people in a positive way in terms of each of us. But is there a resource or something which has really had a big impact on you, which you'd like to share with people? And that may be something related to teaching, but it may be, a video, a song, a film. It could be anything, but something which really impacted you in a positive way.
There's a couple things. There's a couple ways I'd address that. There was a movie called Mr. Holland's Opus. I don't know that it was the world's most famous movie, but if you're a teacher on any level, it's a tearjerker, kind of just very hit home kind of movie. And it's about a guy who actually was a music teacher. He wanted to be a musician. It was the same guy who was in Jaws. I'm not good with actors' names, but anyway, he wanted to be a musician, but musicians, as you may know, Mark, don't always get paid very well.
Absolutely.
That happened in England as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, struggling artist sort of stereotype. So to support himself as a musician, he took a job as a music teacher. And, he just never quite got the break as a musician, but became more and more into teaching. And he wrote over the course of his life, basically what amounts to a symphony, because he was sort of a classical pianist. And the culmination of the movie is all these students he'd worked with over however many years got together and performed the symphony that he wrote. And it's powerful, I think. I mean, like I said, this is not the world's most famous movie, but it was really, really good. I don't remember how long ago it came out. It's probably 10, 15 years. Richard Dreyfuss is the guy in it, I think. On the flip side of it, I put together, I'm going to kind of give you something I've learned personally, and I want to share this with your audience because I think it'll help everybody. I had done a lecture. I was asked to give a talk, and it was a talk for educators. In other words, it was teachers working with teachers to help teachers learn new techniques. So it's kind of a peer-to-peer situation. And I said to the coordinator, what do you want me to speak about? They said, oh, you know so much stuff, Steve. I'm sure you'll find something good. Like, okay, thanks for the counsel. And what I came across was something that has really expanded, and it's become something that's helped a lot of people. So I just want to bring it out here. And I call it the 5 structures of home learning success, but it really could be applied to anything. And since I gave this talk once, I've been asked to do it like 30 more times, but let me just share this really quickly. Lead to success. First one is a physical structure. You can't get anything done if it's noisy, if you don't have a good table, you don't have good lighting, you don't have a quiet work environment. 2 is a time structure. You got to have good time management. You have to do the work when you need to. The 3rd one is academics. You got to know what you got to do. The 4th one is accountability. You have to have somebody who's going to kind of keep you going. And the last one is support. When you need help, you want to know where you're going to go to get help. And I could turn that into a 60-minute presentation, but I'm going to leave it at that. And those things are, and what made me think to talk about that right now, all the result of working with so many people over so long and interacting with so many people, parents, students, professionals, people are sort of parallel to me and sort of beyond me in terms of who they're serving, and just trying to break it down to the most fundamental, basic, doable, achievable actions that people can take. And that's really kind of how I'm all going to try to bring this together. As I know we're pressed on time a little bit, is if you can get those 5 pieces in place, everything else is much more easy.
I think that's brilliant, and I think it's a bit like we were saying before. I think children understanding the whole concept of what learning is about and how you fit it into your life as you're growing and finding out all these things. I think understanding those 5 principles as a parent and as a teacher even is just that kind of, it just means that everything else can fall into place in a way that becomes manageable, even if it's just a compartmentalization of something in your mind, or maybe that's just the way that my brain works. But it just seems a much easier place to start, and I love that, and I can see how valuable that would be to so many people.
Well, yeah, it's the simplicity is what makes it work. That's the beauty of it.
So for those people who'd like to find out more about what you do online and even get involved in some way, tell us where they can go and find out that information.
My website is makethegrade, MaketheGrade.net, which is more or less the clearinghouse of all things that I do. Or you'll find links to everything else there. Includes links to my podcast and some of the services and offerings that I have. The book specifically has its own website, which is maximumeducation.net, although you can get to that through Make the Grade site. One thing I'll just plug a little tiny bit is every Thursday night, although it would be a awful hour for you, your time zone at 8 p.m., I do a live stream. It's called Education Live Thursday. And it's kind of a bringing together all things I see happening in education that week or ongoing things. I always have a guest on there as well in some field. In fact, this week coming up is a person who specializes in helping athletes get scholarships for sports to college. So that's become very popular and getting a nice listenership and viewership there. But makethegrade.net is the kind of central place I would refer people to. I'm also on social media. I'm not the world's best at it. I'm an old guy. But for an old guy, I'm doing pretty good with social media. So I'm on Facebook. You can search for me, Dr. Steven Greene, or Make the Grade. We have our own page. We also have the communities and things like this. So
yeah, fantastic. Well, we'll have links to all of those on the show notes for this episode, so people can click through really easily and find out exactly what they need. So, Stephen, thank you so much for being here. It's been really interesting and a real honour to chat through these concepts, but also with that understanding of exactly how bit by bit we can help each student and take them forward. And some of those examples have been a really great example of that. So, yeah, thank you very much for being here today.
I appreciate the you having me on. I appreciate the chat. I really enjoy doing this. And listen, if we can help one person, only one, I'd rather help hundreds, but if we can help only one, it's worth it. So everybody out there, just do the best you can, plug in, get focused, use the tools available to you, listen to people like Mark and me, I guess, too. But really it's about using the resources. The resources are there, right? It's a matter of just getting them, fitting them for yourself and moving ahead. And, maybe we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, love to. That's great wisdom to finish off with. Thank you so much indeed. Thanks for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information of each episode and to get in touch, go to educationonfire.com. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.